going? Welcome to the first ever Q&A Behind the News, a special episode about young people and the media. I'm Amelia Mosley. Q&A is the discussion program where you get to ask the questions. Our audience today is all school kids, and let's meet our talented panel of teenagers ready to answer their questions. We have wannabe filmmaker Geordie Brown, BTN's 2016 election rookie reporter Maya Sathyamurthy, 13-year-old slam poet Solly Raphael, Zara Bilal, who sparked a national debate with her Q&A question on Donald Trump, school debating champion Daniel Yim, and aspiring sports journalist Pinidu Chandrasekera. Please welcome our panel. Now, our first question tonight comes from Heath Turner.
Why aren't children listened to? Is it because they are young and not thought to be as credible? Or is it just because adults rule this world and don't want the new age of influencers being kids?
It's a really good question. Look, I'm going to throw this one over perhaps to Maya. Would you like to tell me what you think about that?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think kids aren't taken seriously because we have less experience, but I think that's not true anymore because we have so much access to social media, we have so much access to other news sources that are just for us. So we're quite educated on a lot of current affairs and issues and news like things that are happening in recent times. So I think kids should be listened to, and if we all work together and speak out on things that we care about, I think we will be listened to.
That's a really good point. Pinidu, do you have an opinion on this?
Well, first of all, thanks so much for your question, Heath. And I think it's a really important issue at the moment, whether we actually have a voice. And I think we actually do, whether we realise or not. And that's based on us all coming together and putting our voices forward for an issue that we all care about. We only have to go to America, where kids our age are all banding together and really driving a real huge movement for gun reform. And I guess we've seen it before. We've seen it back in the 1970s against the Vietnam War. So I guess we can call it an adult world. I guess they dominate the news, they dominate politics. But as kids, we actually have a powerful voice if we can come together and really show society what we want to change. And that's really important.
Solly, do you feel that you have a voice as a poet?
I do feel I have a voice. I think it comes from trying. I think trying is the only thing we can do. We do have a voice, and it might not be as strong as adults, but I think it's a good enough voice for us to try.
Well, let's move on to our next question now, which comes from Mirjana Zajakovski.
How can news be more interesting so that kids would want to be involved?
Yeah, well, look, that's something we try to do all the time at BTN as well. So I think I'm going to put this one to Maya because you've actually been a rookie reporter for us before. Tell me about what you think about that.
Well, something that I learned from BTN is that you've got to get the audience that you're trying to cater to and see what their interests are. So as BTN puts out a lot of stories that affect children or that interest children. So kind of favouriting the different stories that affect us the most might be a good way to get more kids interested.
And what about you, Zara? What do you think makes the news interesting for young people?
Well, I think it's really important for us to, as young people, recognise that if we want to have a voice and we want to share our stories and things like that, we need to stay involved in the news and make sure we keep, looking back into the news because we know that that's what will make us, be able to relate to everyone. And I think that that's what we need to do in order to be able to tackle the real, social issues and issues that we want to change.
Pinidu?
Well, I think, Mirjana, the first thing is we don't really need to change the news. It's just a matter of us understanding it better. So like what BTN does, they take news that is out there in the world at the moment and then they change it, they tell us what's going on behind what the news report's actually about. Gives us a bit of background, something we can all relate to. And I guess that could be done across the board if we look at our school system through education. If more of us were learning about economics, the legal system, the political system, we could be more equipped to understand what's on the nightly news when we go home to watch it. So I guess the news will always be the news. It's what makes headlines. It's about us being taught more to understand it, learning more about it, and then that way we can all become more engaged.
Daniel? Oh, yes.
Sorry, I just have to disagree there just slightly. And I mean, I don't think we necessarily, as young people, should underplay each other's intelligence. I think that most of us are really intelligent and we have education available to us to an extent which allows us to understand the news. But one of the issues is with the news is that we aren't necessarily involved. What would be great is if we could get on it. And, you know, we all often see breakfast television shows bring on people to give their opinion on different issues that are going around in society at the time. But you never see any children or teenagers up there giving their opinion. It's always sort of middle-aged people, and to us that isn't interesting. So it's about creating stories that appeal to both our interests, but also hearing our opinions on the stories of what's going on in day-to-day life.
Okay, well, let's give Daniel a go. What do you think?
Well, I have to agree with Pinadu, and I don't think it's an insult on young people's intelligence or a problem with how smart they are or anything like that. I think it's the problem with understanding who the relevant people are, what sort of language we should be using, and the terms and the ideas which are at play. And if the solution to that is more education, particularly specialised to helping people engage with those ideas, I think that's definitely the way forward. And it's not to say that people aren't smart enough, it's to say that they're not educated in the right way.
Okay, well, let's talk about a really important issue now with our next question, which comes from Christopher Winkle.
With climate change becoming a more significant issue by the day, are young people doing enough to pressure relevant bodies into making meaningful change?
It's a really good question. I'm going to throw it to Solly because I know that this is something you actually feel quite passionate about and you write about all the time.
Yeah. I think you don't have to be a Prime Minister or someone powerful to make a change on climate change. I think it's the little things we do, like just if we see a plastic bag that might not mean much, but if we pick it up and put it in the bin, it's such a small thing, but if we all do it, it does make a big difference to climate change.
Yeah, absolutely. Pineda, do you have an opinion on this one?
I have to agree with Solly. I think that's a really important point. Thanks for your question too, Christopher, but about us doing little things. And then going to the heart of your question about really pressuring those major bodies in politics and society, it's about us understanding what sort of decisions they actually make. It's not as clear-cut as, you know, us pressuring them is going to make them flick on a switch and suddenly it's going to solve everything. Certainly we must pressure them, but we must also understand how complex and intricate an issue like climate change is. Like, we look at it through the prism of coal mines or through deforestation. There's so many people affected by these sorts of things. If you take deforestation, for example, you know, we think you can either allow it or you don't allow it. And it's either good for the environment if you don't allow it, while it might be good for industry if you do allow it. There's so many stakeholders there. So I guess the important thing is we should pressure them, but also have a vision over what we want them to do and really push that through our voice.
All right, let's bring in Maya. What's your opinion on this?
Oh, I definitely think that kids should try to spread their opinions on climate change because this is the world that we're going to be living in. This is what we have to take care of. So we should really take responsibility for our world. And nowadays it's a lot more easy to share your opinions on climate change and on the environment because we have so much education about it at school. We have all these news outlets telling us what's going on in the world and we have an easy understanding of everything. So I think it's really important for us as the youth, as the next generation who's going to be taking care of our planet, to really push the adults to make change. Maybe we can even make change. We can work, as Solly said, we can pick up plastic bags, we can just do the little things, but we can also do the big things. We can educate our friends, we can talk to other people, and yeah, I think it's really important.
It's clearly something everyone's quite passionate about. How do you feel, Zara?
Yeah, I think, personally, I think it's more important, though, that we have to realise that although we might not have the ability to, we need to realise that that climate change is something that is obviously extremely important to our generation, being as the ones who will eventually have to deal with it. And we have to recognise that, you know, from a stakeholder perspective, we have the most to lose or gain from the environment. And we have to ensure that we don't let, you know, industries and things like that overpower our view. And, like, for example, the Adani mines and things like that. We can't let, you know, industry or people with a lot of money overpower our views and allow the climate issues to continue when it's so important for everyone.
Well, let's move on now to another topic that I have a feeling these guys are going to have a lot of opinions about as well. It's social media. So let's go to Kathleen Trin with our next question.
Yeah. In our world of fake news, how can young people develop the critical thinking skills necessary to sort out what is real and what's not?
Daniel, I'm going to give this one to you. What do you think?
Well, I don't think the problem is that we don't have the skills. I think the problem is that we don't have the motivation or the knowledge that we have to push further to find the truth. I think especially in a world where there's social media, things like headlines and bylines and flashy news get a lot of clicks and get a lot of attention. But the thing we have to remember is you need to read the article, you need to read from different sources, you need to read lots before you can be sure that you've understood and you fully know what the truth is. And I think the problem is that not that we're not equipped or we're not intelligent enough, but that we need to know that we need to do more.
All right, let's go to Geordie. What do you think about fake news?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Daniel on what he said, but to go a bit further, you know, just be wary about even trusted news organisations. Just be wary that in some articles or in some stories there might be some kind of underlying bias, and try to read the article and depict the facts, and then from those facts come to a conclusion yourself, and ignore sort of the where the bias sort of gets in. But talking about things that are absolutely fake, that would tend to more be in organisations which are sort of known for that. So research it and try and find out what sort of places are frequently printing things which are fake. But I also think it's important that we do have a sense of trust in the media inherently, however, just to keep our wits about us.
Yeah, that's good advice. Maya, what do you think, because you've had some experience being a journalist, can you pick fake news?
Oh yeah, I think the key to understanding what fake news is and how to get around it is exposure. And if you keep reading lots of articles and you keep understanding what's going on in the world, if you read 2 or more articles on one issue, so you can kind of get 2 different opinions or 2 different writers' perspectives, you can get more information. That really helps you get a better understanding for the topic. And it also helps you get around the fake news and the people who are lying or people who are trying to deceive you into thinking that their opinion is real. So, and also distinguishing between opinionated news stories and factual. So that's a really important thing to have. And that all comes with reading more stories. And on the flip side, to Daniel's point, I think a lot of kids are motivated to read the news. And that's why we have sources like BTN. And that's why our generation especially has more understanding of what's real and what's not.
Loving the BTN plugs.
I also think just the reason our generation is more critical about it is because we've kind of had to be. I mean, this notion of fake news, although it's been great in enlightening us what's fake and what's not, it's also shown us that there is a lot of fake news in our media that we have not ever realised before. So I think there is that level of distrust because we've realised that it's so common around us and it happens so easily. And I think now we've had to learn that, like, facts have many faces and that not everything we read is true. So I do think to some extent, like, it's a good thing that this fake news notion has come out because it's taught us to be so much more critical of everything we read and things like that.
That's a really good point. Good on you, Zara. I told you guys they'd be passionate about this one. Now, just a reminder, you are watching Q&A Behind the News. Now, our next question comes from someone with a very nice name, Amelia Rose.
My question is for Solly. Do you think coming from a smaller city like Coffs makes it harder to be heard, or is the internet breaking these barriers?
I think it definitely is harder to have your say and have your opinion shown. It definitely is easier in bigger cities, but it can be done, and with social media and online, it is much easier.
What do you think about this, Jodie? How do you feel?
Well, yeah, I'm from a rural area as well, Tamworth, and I definitely would agree with Solly that it is harder to get your voice out there and to feel like your opinion is just as valid. But like you said, it is possible, and it's about, like what I said earlier, it's about seeing opportunities in front of you and trying to go and create opportunities for yourself so that you do start to create a voice. And you can do that with so many platforms now, with social media, or particularly in rural areas with your local news outlets like your newspapers and things like that. Go and speak to them about what you're passionate about, and you'll start to see sort of a real shift in how you're listened to.
And I think Amelia pretty much hit the nail on the head when she said social media. Social media is exactly how we transcend this rural-city divide, and not just within Australia, within the whole world. We've seen revolutions back in the Middle East based off Facebook, and people getting through Facebook to each other and motivating each other, even though the government shuts down social media. So social media is the nail on the head here. This is how we can transcend boundaries, not just where we live, but what our socioeconomic standards are. And these sorts of things are really transcended through social media, so everyone really does have a voice, and it's a really powerful thing.
All right, well, let's move on to our next question, which comes from Sophia Proti.
My question is for Zara, who I've seen on Q&A. You talked about the negative effect of some of Donald Trump's tweets. What advice would you give to other young people who are being affected by the biased opinions of world leaders?
That's a really great question, and I think that it's really important when we're young people to, recognise the fact that we have a voice, and that just because we are put under labels or we have labels imposed on us, that we aren't those labels. And it's really important to break free from those stereotypes and understand that stereotypes do provide a very one-dimensional perspective on us, and we are so much bigger than that. And I think that comes through talking and sharing your perspective and sharing who you are, and it also comes through writing to publications and getting your voice out there and rewriting those misconstructed narratives that have appeared around in society.
Zara, for other kids other than Sophia who might not have seen your question, can you tell me a little bit about what actually did upset you about Donald Trump's tweets?
I think it's just the idea that when you have world leaders telling the entire world, I mean, he's the kind of person who has unlimited outreach, and when he goes around spreading rumours or ideas that aren't ever true and never fact-checking his work, it creates it's quite a struggle for people in minorities, because I think that it imposes on them things that then they have to themselves go out and stop. When they're already at a young age trying to figure out who they are then told that you are this when you really don't feel like that.
Daniel, do you have an opinion on this one?
Yes, I do. I think while social media gives a few people the power to influence vast numbers of individuals across national borders, I think the important thing to remember is that you're not a victim just as a victim. By hearing these things, you have the opportunity to fight back in a very direct and meaningful way, which is to say, you don't just have to accept that what this person is saying about you is true or false or whatever. You can reply to what they say directly to their account, and if it gets enough traction, if enough people hear what you're saying, really you have as much influence as they do.
Is it enough though, because people are, constantly tweeting? There's a lot of noise out there. How do you feel about it, Maya?
I feel like it's quite scary sometimes that people with so much power can really reinforce these terrible stereotypes that don't define us as a bunch of people. And I think it's really sad that this happens, but we do have the power over this kind of stuff. We can, as Daniel said, we can speak up against it. We can raise awareness for things that we believe in. Yeah, I think it's really important that people our age especially stand up for who we are, like where we're from, and that we fight against these stereotypes.
And yeah, just with that, it's most important that we come together and do it, because, the voices of a community is so much stronger than one person. And I think, as young people, we have the power to see the world as it is, and when we recognise that something's wrong, it's to speak up.
You're watching Q&A Behind the News, and our next question affects just about everyone in this room, and it comes from Violet Nathanson.
If kids were allowed to vote from the age of 16, how do we know that they will exercise the vote well and not joke around?
Geordie, do you have an opinion?
Well, we don't. And I suppose that is a legitimate concern that you have. I mean, my opinion is that you have to cap the vote somewhere, and where it is at the moment seems to fit quite well, because I know as a voting age, even some of my peers aren't that engaged in the political sphere. So I think before we have a discussion about lowering the voting age, we have to have a discussion about youth engagement in politics and youth engagement in current affairs, like we have been. Because without that piece of the puzzle, then you're not going to have a base of people to have a legitimate opinion, especially if they aren't necessarily engaged in what's going on day to day. So
Jordy, you are the only one on the panel who can vote, I'm pretty sure. So I'm going to maybe ask Solly what he thinks as possibly the youngest here.
I think before we should start lowering the age limit for voting, I think we do need to teach all the kids and teens more about voting. Like I was taught a bit in year 5 and 6, but not enough to really fully understand who is going to run the country best, and I think lowering it's not the best idea at the moment.
Maybe not without some more education. What do you think about that, Penidu?
I completely agree with Solly on that point. I think as it stands at the moment, we see enough donkey votes even in the current age of voting. So if we bring it down even more, we need to make sure, are these 2 extra years of people in our society equipped with enough information and enough knowledge to go out there and exercise their right to vote? And it comes back to what Solly and Jordy had said. It's education about these sorts of things. If there was more political engagement from primary school up, if there was more people learning about financial literacy, and I know that's the thing that's been down in the Australian population. You know, people like us, we don't learn too much about how to do our income taxes, even though we might be getting into jobs at the age of 16 or 17. So across the board, things like political engagement, financial literacy, and awareness of our legal system, if we can instill this in our population, in our schooling system, from an even younger age, then perhaps by the age of 16, we'll be better equipped and know more to go out there and vote. But through the current system, it probably won't happen.
But we do have 16-year-olds working and paying taxes. So what do you think about that, Zara? Should you be voting?
Well, while I don't completely think that we should be voting, and I'm definitely happy with it where it is right now, I do think that if it was to be lowered, I think that people would take it, I think to some extent people would take it seriously, because, I mean, you see young people who are the same age as us fighting for social issues in, you know, America. And I think that if we were given that responsibility, I do think that with the proper education and things, we could make really great impact on the issues that matter to us.
Maya, can you be trusted with the vote?
I think I'd definitely love to vote if I was given the opportunity, because I want that power to influence how our country runs. I want to be able to share my beliefs. I want to be able to change the things that I care about. For example, I don't agree with the NAPLAN, for example. And I'm sure a lot of people in the room would say the same thing. And I want my chance to speak up about it. I want my chance to change how our country works, because this is the place that I live, and I'm sure that a lot of you agree that if you had the chance to change something that you care about, you would do anything in your power to. So I think
so that yes?
Yes, definitely.
Yes. All right, well, let's move on to our next question, which comes from Patrick Boyle.
The world is now full with the egos of Donald Trump's and Kim Jong-un's. With bullying being such a major issue with young people and adults freaking out about what is the best way to deal with us, do you think one of the best ways would be if they, adults, would stop treating each other so badly to lead by example?
It's a really good question, Patrick. I'm going to throw this one to Daniel, I think.
I think leading by example, sure, is a great way to start engaging more young people in the media, because when you turn on the TV and see that the people with supposedly the best educations...
Are adults doing that at the moment, though, do you think?
I think it depends on the adult, but in the vast majority of cases, at least in places like the US, I think there's still much left to be done. And importantly, I think, as we've been talking about, the way to start a change is that it can come from the bottom up as well, and that if young people show poise and eloquence when engaging with people who are many decades their senior, I think it really puts the onus on them to get their act together.
What do you think, Solly?
I think we need to start with adults, and I think if you want to be in the media, whether you're an adult or a child or a teen, and if you want to be famous, you've got to realise that people of all ages and all countries are going to be watching you and looking up to you as a role model, and I think that's a big point we need to look at for bullying.
And what do you think, Maya?
Yeah, I think it's definitely important that everyone gets their opinions out there, regardless of where they're from, and we shouldn't discriminate against anyone who has different opinions to us.
But do we feel like adults are setting a bad example, just to bring it back to the question a little? What do you think, Sarah?
I think that, you know, our world leaders, definitely the ones you've given examples of, aren't setting the best example, but I think it's important to also look at all of the other incredible people who are setting a good example and are saying no to bullying. And I think that while there is a certain percentage of this population who are doing the wrong thing, I think there always will be, and I think it's important for us to, you know, look at make our mentors the people who are really doing the right thing and follow in their footsteps rather than, I don't know, blaming people who are older than us for our own actions.
All right, let's move to our next question, which comes from Amity Smith.
The book Wonder, which was released as a movie last year, started a campaign to encourage us all to choose kind. Do you believe that today's media consider choosing kind when reporting events or stories about people in the public eye, or are they more driven by ratings?
Very good question. Maya, what do you think on this one?
I think it's really important that we are polite to each other, especially over heated social media debates. There's a lot of people who disregard being kind to others over their opinions, and sometimes we can offend people, and it's not the best thing when you're trying to get your point across. So it's probably a better idea to communicate your ideas in a polite and diplomatic and well-mannered way rather than to be aggressive online, especially when there's other people seeing what you're saying, and you could represent your people in the wrong way and people who stand for the same things that you stand for. And that's not really what you want to do when you're fighting for something good. So.
Zara, you are on social media, on Twitter quite a lot. How do you feel? Do you feel that perhaps there's some unkindness, especially in those kinds of spaces?
Yeah, but I think more often than not, when you are unkind on social media, it doesn't reflect very well on you. Like Maya said, I think it shows more about you when you're unkind, and I think it's really important to, even when passionate about something or getting riled up, to take a step back and, you know, breathe, because in order to make change, you can't do it with a hot head, and you need to be really understand, you know, who your audience is and make sure to be polite, and that's the best way to get your point across, I think.
It's a good way to live. Penidu, what do you think?
Well, I think it's a very important question about how the media, whether they should be kind or go for ratings. And I guess it's an even more prevalent question when we consider the recent scandals over Barnaby Joyce. And even a couple of days ago, it happened in sports media. On Sunday morning, Liverpool played Real Madrid in the Champions League final, and Liverpool's German goalkeeper made 2 mistakes, and he was vilified over it through the social media and beyond. So I guess we need to work out finding some sort of perspective about how we conduct ourselves on social media. And one of the problems here is some people feel a form of protection when they're on social media. The term keyboard warrior comes from the fact that people feel protected and behind a veil when they're behind their keyboard on the social media. So it's about us upholding the values that we have when we see someone face to face, the same manners, the same respect on social media, and using it in the same way. Because whether we like, it's the same thing. They're both communication, just in 2 different forms.
All right, well, we have time for one last question. It comes from Izzy Tapia.
I watch a lot of YouTube, probably more than I do with normal TV. I like it because it's funny and interesting, and I can choose the stars and topics that I like nail art and DIYs and people like Miranda Sings. So if YouTube can provide exactly the kind of things that I want to watch, will there be a time when TV for kids my age will no longer be needed?
It's a very good question, Izzy, and everyone loves Miranda Sings, right? Solly, what do you think?
To be honest, I'm not sure. I don't know if kids' TV might fade out a little bit towards YouTube. I definitely think YouTube will rise in children and teens watch it more, but I'm not too sure.
Geordie, you're a little bit older. What do you think?
I also watched a lot of YouTube growing up, and it is such a great platform. But it's also great for entertainment, but also education, like you said, with DIYs and things. So really, I don't think there's much else to say other than it might work simultaneously and continue to be a really cool learning source for young people.
All right, I'll hear the last word from Maya. What do you think?
Oh, yes, definitely. I think YouTube is going to become a lot bigger over the years because a lot of the people in the room probably watch a lot of YouTube. But the only problem with platforms like YouTube is it's hard to regulate what you watch. Some things might be scary or inappropriate and hard to take in. And the good thing about TV is that it can be regulated and it can be sourced from credible news sources, especially if it's a news channel. But I think definitely YouTube is a really great way for other creators. Even if you wanted to share something, you could go out, and it's a really great way to get news, put out news, get entertainment, and it's catered for us, so yeah.
Good points. Well, that's all we have time for. Please thank our wonderful panel, Geordie Brown, Maya Sathiamurthy, Solly Raphael, Zara Bilal, Daniel Yim, and Penidu Chandrasekara. Thank you so much for being part of Q&A Behind the News. I'm Amelia Mosley, and I'll see you next on BTN.